All right. Thank you so much for coming here tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed some drinks, a little bit of chat. There's some pasta. That's the taste part of Talk and Taste. My name is Sadia. I am the host of Talk and Taste. Thank you. This small little get-together actually started in my apartment with a group of friends, and we just debated topics and ate dinner. And then we blew it up into a public event. And so we do this thing about every 3 months. We've had topics around whether we should have kids, to is America over, and to this topic, which is around the state of boys and men. So I'm going to give you my spiel. Tonight we are diving into this topic, the state of boys and men. It's a topic that's very hard to ignore. I think we can kind of see that, boys and young men are in a bit of a crisis. We see it in Andrew Tate. We have this epidemic of the male loneliness epidemic and so much more. So clearly there is something deeper at work. And many of us are left asking, what is happening to our boys? If you are a man, welcome. And so, yes, it is a complicated moment with many researchers and experts here that are grappling with its solutions and a way forward. And that's why I'm honored to have these three experts here. To start, we have Dr. Michael Kimmel in the middle. Michael Kimmel, yes. He is a SUNY Distinguished Professor of Sociology and Gender Studies at Stony Brook University. A leading scholar on men and masculinity, he has written influential books such as Guyland, which is up here if you guys want to check it out. It's a really good book. And Angry White Men. He is also a sought-after speaker, having given numerous talks, including several TED Talks. So thank you, Michael, for joining us. And then to my left, we have the lovely Lisa Britton. Lisa is, yes, I should pause for applause. She is a writer for Evie magazine and an advocate for boys, men, and fathers. She believes the breakdown of the relationships between men and women is the root cause of many societal issues today and has made it her life's mission to make positive change. Her tireless efforts have brought her to Washington, D.C., and have attracted attention from influential leaders with her work shared by members of Congress, presidential candidates, governors, a first lady, and even the President of the United States. So thank you, Lisa. And then to our far left, we have Dr. Mark Sherman. He is a professor of psychology at SUNY New Paltz and has studied, taught, and written about gender issues since the late 1970s, turning his focus in the early 1990s to problems facing boys and young men. He has done many blog posts on the topic for Psychology Today, motivated his research, the fact that he has 3 sons and 5 young grandsons who are actually here today. Mark is also a highly regarded humorist and singer-songwriter. We have some of his CDs actually up front. So thank you, Mark. Okay, so people think this is going to be like a live action Jubilee. I think that was a comment on the social page, but it's not. This is actually going to be a panel discussion in the style of a debate. And it's really fostering a conversation across perspectives. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with opening statements. Each of these, our panelists, are going to have 3 minutes to open us up. And then we're going to open the floor to a rebuttal. And this is where I will take a back seat, but they're going to start poking holes, finding similarities around their opening statements, along with some key discussion points that I've outlined in front of me. And then we'll end with our closing statement, which will be 3 minutes each, and then we'll run a vote. I think most of us have put a vote in, and Becca, do we have a winner on do you mind passing it to me so I can, our lovely Becca, thank you, Becca. Okay. So you guys probably got the question, is society putting men at a disadvantage or an advantage? And most of us, by a lot, voted no, men still have the advantage today. That is a whopping 42 votes versus 13. And so you'll hear perspectives on both sides of this argument, and we'll do another vote at the end and see if anyone has swayed opinion. So, shall we begin? We're gonna start with Mark Sherman with your opening statement. I am going to put, I'm gonna put 3 minutes on the timer, and let me know when you are ready.
And Kim's just gonna shut off your mic.
Okay.
Yeah, Kim is gonna shut off your mic.
Can everyone hear me okay? My mic is caught here. Okay. Hi. Thank you. First of all, thanks, Sadia, for having me, and thanks to my fellow panelists. 3 minutes is a very short time. I believe, when the topic was originally spoken about, it was going to be what's happening with men, and I said, how about boys? About men, do they still have a lot of power and stuff? I think they do. My biggest concern is boys and young men. The evidence is overwhelming. Overwhelming. They are not doing well in so many ways. They're not doing well in school. They're killing themselves at a much higher rate than young girls and women. They are incarcerated at a huge rate. And to me, one of the major problems is this has not gotten attention until recently. And when Donald Trump was elected, I'm not going to get political, but I'll tell you he's not a favorite of mine, let's put it that way. Suddenly, because young men, a lot of them voted for Trump, it was like, wait a minute, we've missed something, especially on the liberal side. And they began to say, we haven't paid enough attention to our young boys. The attention that was paid, in my opinion, from a lot of sources is, how can we make boys different? There's something wrong with boys. Now, as Sadia said, I have 3 grown sons, only one of them is here, my oldest, and I have 5 grandsons, and the oldest is here, and I'm very happy they're here. So they can say it's all false, what I'm saying. The fact is, though, that young men are struggling tremendously, and because men have done well, I don't think boys and young men ever got the attention they deserved. And they play video games. They're really in big, big trouble, and it's finally beginning to get attention. I'm not surprised by the vote. This happens all the time. But right now, in my opinion, not so much adult men, not so much me. I'm beyond adulthood. I'm old, and Michael is still pretty young. We're fine. But I'll say one very quick thing. When I was in grad school, I was at Harvard, and there was an undergraduate. She was very smart. Law schools were saying to her, we don't want you, essentially. You're a female. You all know, I think, that law schools are now more than half female. Medical schools, too. Things have dramatically changed. So I remember what it was like. I was an ardent feminist, and I stayed that way, but then I began to get really concerned about how boys were doing when I began to notice the troubles they were in. And to me, the biggest issue is they have been more or less neglected by the mainstream. We often do, the people I hang with, we all know the suicide rate for young men is about 3 or 4 times what it is for young women. A lot of people off the street, they don't know it. Because, well, after all, it's males. Well, males are people too. I barely qualify personally, but I can tell you that my sons and grandsons qualify tremendously. And so that is the issue that I'm looking at. There's been neglect to the point where people think maybe boys and young men are doing well. Colleges, how they're doing in school, and perhaps worst of all, the loneliness they feel, often eventuating in suicide. And this drastically needs our attention. Finally, if women are interested in men, I think they want men around them who are well educated, who care about things, who want to work, who want to achieve, who are not sitting in their basement, the usual stereotype, playing video games. That's not what I think women want. And this is what they're going to get. And I think a lot of women are saying, I don't need this. I don't need men. But men aren't so bad. I've known a lot in my life, and they're not so bad. Done? Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
All right, Lisa. Lisa, would you like to add? Ready?
Hello, everyone. My name's Lisa Britton, and I've been an advocate for boys, men, and fathers for a little over 7 years. It's funny, I looked at the question, and over 7 years ago, I would definitely have said, no, men still have the advantage. I was pretty, I would say, hardcore feminist. That's my sister there. She would remember. And I volunteered in Africa, built a girls' dorm at a school there, and I started back in 2017 writing children's books for girls about social media, going online, and then trying to fight the victimhood mentality that I felt like we were teaching girls, trying to convince them that they're not victims, they're strong. And I started traveling to DC, and a staffer, it was actually on the Republican side, said, "We love what you're doing for girls, but have you ever considered helping boys? They're in trouble now." And I looked at them like they had 3 heads. I was like, boys? Why would we have to help boys? Like, they rule everything. So I was that person who just didn't get it. But instead of just cringe and say, no, it's girls and women, I went home and I just did a deep dive down, and I discovered a very serious crisis, a boy crisis. And there was a lot of experts talking about it, and I just had no idea. I was blindsided. I was like, wow, it felt like my whole perspective of everything changed. And since then, I started just educating myself more. I started trying to spread awareness, because my goal was to wake up more people like me who didn't know, who would dismiss the issues, dismiss the suicide rates, and say, well, men have all the power. After 7 years and working with a lot of our leaders on both sides, and experts from Richard Reeves to Warren Farrell, I've learned, no, I would definitely say I would switch my vote by the end. I'm not telling you to do so, but after 7 years of research, basically, I'm very concerned about the state of boys and men in the country. And I believe that this fuels so many other issues that we have, from school shootings to the suicide to fentanyl overdose. Over twice as many are men. Family breakdown, the gender war, the loneliness crisis, everything is fueled by the boys and men's crisis today. So I hope by the end of the evening, you guys might have a little bit of a different perspective. I'm not thinking it took me 7 years to get to sitting here and speaking to others about it, but I definitely think you might leave tonight with a different perspective.
Thank you, Lisa. Michael?
All right, quick show of hands. How many of you have endured a class in sociology? Okay, thanks. So I'm going to do a quick survey too. You don't have to answer this, but when you were asked the question, is today's society putting boys and men at a disadvantage, what man did you see? What was his race? What was his age? What was his sexuality? My first question is, which men are we talking about? Are we actually talking about some men who are doing just fine, thank you very much, and other men who are not doing so well at all? There's differences by class, there's differences by race, by sexuality, by age, et cetera. And these are the things that I think we need to explore in this conversation. We have recently, for some years, there has been a tremendous amount of energy spent on diversity, inclusion, equity, which we are now being told actually was discrimination against white men, straight white men, actually. And so much of my work in Angry White Men, I try to take this on. My Angry White Men came out in 2013. The name Trump doesn't appear in the book at all. But what I wrote about were his followers before he showed up. And here's what I think is an easy way to think about this. I'm going to tell you a story of how I first started to write this book, Angry White Men, and how I think we're thinking about it today. I was on a TV talk show, very familiar to everybody. Black female host came out of Chicago. And I was on this show opposite 4 white men who believed that they were the victims of reverse discrimination in the workplace. That diversity, diversity, equity, inclusion had gone so far that white men were now the new victims. You have now heard this narrative quite a bit. And so I was there to respond to them. And they all told their stories about how they were qualified for jobs, qualified for promotion, didn't get it, really angry. And the reason I'm telling you this story is I want you to hear the title of the show. The title of the show was a quote from one of the men, and it was, "A black woman stole my job." So when it was my turn to speak, I said, I have just one question for you guys. And it's about the title of the show, "A Black Woman Stole My Job." Actually, it's about one word in the title. I want to know about the word "my." Where did you get the idea it was your job? Why isn't the title of the show "Black Woman Got the Job"? A black woman got a job. Because without confronting white men's sense of entitlement, we will never understand why so many men resist gender equality. Because we think this is a level playing field. So any policy that tilts it even a little bit, we think, oh my God, water's rushing uphill, it's reverse discrimination against us. So let me be very clear. White men, we are the beneficiaries of the single greatest affirmative action program in the history of the world. It is called the history of the world. So I want to make a distinction, and I think this will come out in our conversation. This is the last thing I want to say. Things may be felt as real. There are many people who feel that they are the victims of reverse discrimination. And any therapist will tell you, you don't tell someone their feelings are wrong, but their feelings may not be true. They are real, and they may act on them, but they may not be true. That is to say, they're not an accurate assessment of their situation. From where I sit, straight white men still rule the world. And in my political way of thinking, that has begun to change, and it has to change a lot more.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, so now we are going to open the floor to rebuttals. So I'm going to be playing a background role, but I am going to start with our first topic, which is really opening the floor on how boys today are raised. I think there's a lot of generational differences to how, Michael, you've been raised as a boy versus what modern boys are facing today with parenthood and the systems at play. So I'm going to leave it to you guys to start the discussion, and then we can go from there. Anyone? I'll leave it. Do you want to start, Mark? Because I think, yeah.
That's a very good question. I think in many ways, boys being raised today better than they were. I'll talk about my own. I'm sorry. Yes, of course. I'll talk about my own life very briefly. My father was a very difficult man. He hit me. He screamed at me, calling me names that were horrible. It was really not good. I have 3 sons. One of them can raise his hand and say, "Dad, you were just like that." But obviously that isn't true. I wouldn't be saying it if I thought it was. And I thought I did much better with my sons. I vowed never to hit them, not to yell at them and call them names. And I think I did better than my dad. I think my sons, who have between them five sons of their own, are doing a great job, very involved. On the other hand, I think the world, the culture, is not necessarily doing so well by boys, and I'll point out schools. Schools are a problem. What you do at home is one thing. Schools in many ways have become girl-friendly. There's been plenty of research on this. There are stories and stuff which girls like, but boys are turned off to. Boys who wrote kinds of things which look like violence because of school shootings, which are exceptionally rare, they got into trouble. And because, they shouldn't write about violence, but they're not doing violence. As I was a kid, I'm not violent. I was probably doing that kind of thing, but there was nothing wrong with me. I was a boy. I think we don't recognize the biology of boys. They're not the same as girls. There's overlap, but they're not the same, and I think we don't do so well sometimes on that. Thank you.
Michael, do you believe there's a feminization of school systems?
Well, in a kind of backward way, I would want to say 2 things. I think there's been a masculinization of girls, not a feminization of boys. 40 years ago, 11% of girls played sports in high school and middle school. Today, 40% do. Girls now think, you ask a guy what it means to be a man, and he will give you the same definition that I might have given, that my father might have given. It was John Wayne once upon a time, then it was Arnold. I don't know who it is now, but you get the idea. And I think the answer to this is men have changed, the world has changed dramatically. And what has not changed is the ideology of masculinity. The ideology of femininity, you ask a girl, what does it mean to be a woman? She says, anything I want, right? You ask a boy, and it's still that straitjacket. And I think that is truly the important thing that we need to focus on, is this disconnect. So yes, it is empirically true. I would bet that this is true for you. Men today are doing far more housework and childcare than their fathers were. The workplace would be unrecognizable. Today's workplace would be unrecognizable to our fathers, your grandfathers. Absolutely. But how have we prepared them for this? We have not well prepared them. They're still thinking the same ideas about masculinity, thus that sense of entitlement. So I think that this is this disconnect between the world that has changed and our ideas about masculinity have not. I think that is the key. And to me, the most important variable that explains boys' performance, for example, in school, has very little to do with the fact that we're doing a curriculum for girls. It has to do with a very easy understanding of what masculinity means to be a boy. For boys, academic disengagement is a sign of masculinity. You ask guys, oh, I can't hang with you tonight because I have to study. What a pussy! Are you kidding? Right? You can't say that. You can't. For boys, the level of gender policing by other boys is the thing that holds boys back, not a curriculum geared to girls. Let me ask the men in the room. You'll all know what I'm going to say. Look at your fingernails. Do you guys know what I'm talking about right away? Come on, the guys, you know, right? If you go like this, okay. If you go like this, beat them up. Likely gay, right? You remember this? How do you cross your legs? Look at the bottom of your shoes. How do you walk? How do you talk? How do you move? How do you dress? Every single thing you do is policed by other guys. The things we do, this is why I argue that masculinity is homosocial. We perform it for other men's judgment. So if you want boys' scores in English and writing to get better, you have to interrupt this conversation. You have to find ways to let boys become resilient enough to withstand the constant gender policing that they endure.
Thank you. Lisa, I know that you work a lot with boys and the subject around boys in school, and that there are some clear biological differences as well, not just within the cultural realm. Can you discuss more about that?
Yes, there are some systemic disadvantages for boys, which they're addressing now in different possible ways of like redshirting boys, because boys are behind biologically girls from the beginning, and they're trying to figure out if they hold on to boys one extra year, they start school a year behind girls, then they'll be at the same developmental maturity to follow along for the rest of school. So there's a few, like the Brookings Institution is kind of pushing this right now. And it's talking to different politicians, seeing if it's something we can do. There's people on both sides of the fence. I'm kind of on the fence on this one, because a lot of people say, no, that's just more kind of shaming of boys, saying that, but it's following biological trends for boys. So there definitely is some systemic things that we can do to help boys, because they are different than girls. It's not, a lot of people, when I say like we need to, we keep telling boys they have to change for our education system, but how about we refine our education system so that it helps everybody? And you can do that by more male teachers. We have a lack of male teachers. 11% of guidance counselors in schools are men. 11%, when boys at this age need help more than ever. So there's a lack of masculinity in schools, a lack of men that these boys need. And so there definitely is systemic things. I wouldn't say it's all boys picking on other boys, and that's why they're doing bad in school. That definitely isn't the case. There's a lot of issues starting in the early years, right up until college, right up until people getting their PhDs. So that's definitely something we should do. And also, it kind of going back on how boys are raised today. I'm at the age now where a lot of my girlfriends are having sons. My sister has a young son. And all my friends are concerned about their boys in the world today. and they're not concerned about how their boys are going to treat the world. They're concerned about how the world is going to treat their boys. So this is definitely, this isn't just men saying angry men or something. Like, there's moms, there's women, we're afraid. I'm afraid for my nephew. I don't know how he'll be treated. I just wanted to say one other thing. I kind of feel like the term reverse discrimination, there's no such thing. There's discrimination. And it should be all of our goals to make sure no one gets discriminated against in society. And we have compassion for everyone. We address their issues and make sure that they feel human too, no matter your skin color or your gender or your religion. So definitely discrimination's bad. Let's go with that.
How has the education system...
We can all agree on that one.
Yes, there's alignment. How has the education system discriminated or neglected boys in like the learning phase?
Well, the boys have different biological needs, and over the past few decades, there has been a tendency to medicate some boys for basically, and it's going to sound bad, medicate them for being boys, you know. Something that I learned even with my nephew is that he's a little boy. You know, it's hard to deny. He's a little boy. He's running around, so much energy, cars thrown all over the place. And it's hard to get him to sit down. And studies show that girls are more quiet. They're good at sitting in class. So one of the things I advocate for is funding more vocational training. So I visited a vocational school in New Jersey, and they, from the beginning, they focus more on hands-on activities and stuff like that, which really helps boys. That's how they learn, you know. And it's kind of like we all have to be a little bit emotionally mature and be like, okay, there can be some biological differences, and how can we shape them to specifically help all of them. And it's broadly speaking too, like that's a generalization. Some girls are rambunctious, and then some boys are quiet and way ahead of their grade. But generally speaking, if we want to address the crisis of them falling behind, we have to pay attention to those differences.
Yeah, I just want to say something about Michael was saying. I hear the word masculinity often talked about as if it's a bad thing. In fact, there's someone in Division 51 of the American Psychological Association, of which I'm a member, not always such a happy member, who says it is. He just says there's something wrong with being masculine. Traditional masculinity is the worst. Masculinity has long been associated with males. I consider myself masculine. I never could fight. I couldn't even run away very fast. So I was in big trouble. But the fact is, some boys almost feel ashamed to be masculine. It's been put down, and there's no reason to put it down. There was an ad that came out several years ago by Gillette. I forget the name. It was The Best Men Can Be. And it showed a couple of boys rolling around fighting on the lawn. They were young boys. And the father separated them. And I think, what the F? I'm sorry, that's as close as I'll come to that word. What is going on? That's what boys do. My brother and I, we were really not, I'll use the word pussies, I think someone used that already. We fought verbally and intellectually. However, Noah is an only child, but his cousins are two sets of brothers. They just fight. That's what they do. Boys do that. And if part of it is called being masculine, so be it. I mean, really, there is nothing shameful about it. And I think one of the big problems is to take boys and say, there's something wrong with you, and we've got to change you, okay? And Michael said something about, I don't think boys have been feminized. I think it's more like girls have been masculinized. I've written a lot of pieces for Psychology Today. So if you go put my name in Psychology Today, you'll find, in boys, you'll find a lot of these pieces. One of them was very popular. It was called The Feminization of Boys and the Masculinization of Girls. Now, I can tell how popular these things are by how many views they get. That got a lot of views. Because there really was this idea that boys, in a way, are being made to be, masculinity is being questioned, so what else is there? And I think that's really a problem. And I say one more thing. I wrote a piece in a couple of newspapers years ago, and the idea was that I think the whole idea was that girls were getting the message, you can do anything. And Michael said that, you can do anything. And boys were getting that message too. But for girls, it meant you can achieve anything. You can go as far as you want. For boys, it was, you don't have to achieve that much. Achieving isn't all that great. Take it easy. Take care of yourself. And I spoke about my father. Tough guy, really, really tough. School and academic performance was very important to him. I came home from junior high, and I didn't know in French the accent marks weren't optional, that they were part of the spelling. And so I got a failing grade. I was in all weekend learning French. French became one of my best classes. My father really cared. I mean, he was tough, he was difficult, but he and other fathers say, we want our boys to really do well in school. Part of the reason they're not is they're not getting that so much. It's like, it's not that big a deal. You can do other things. You can be happy doing other things. Yes, but I think school and achievement is really, really important for boys as well as girls. Okay.
Thank you, Mark. We are now going to zip in the future and talk about men. So there are clearly issues that we have with young adults, young men, and one of them is a reaction to the Me Too movement and feminism. Has feminism today helped or hurt young men? Go ahead.
Yes, so you've probably seen maybe in the headlines that half of Gen Z men think feminism has gone too far today. And then there was another poll, I think it was it Gallup, that just came out that showed that young men believe in gender equality less than they did a few years ago. And so it's coming out, there's some young men who are pushing back on what's going on. And I always say, this isn't the problem. The young men pushing back and saying, it's gone too far, it's this, and reacting, that's a symptom of the problem. And the true problem is that their needs are being neglected. In many ways, they're blamed and shamed for everything today. And what we're seeing today, this pushback on equality, on women, it's a symptom. If we double down on saying that they're the problem, the issues are only going to get worse. So we have to look at it as, okay, why are they pushing back on this? What are they telling us? We need to listen to them. We need to address their concerns. We need to address the cultural ways that we treat them. Something that I talk about a lot is sayings like the future is female. These young men have been hearing this since they were kids. The future is female. When you're an impressionable boy and you're like, oh, I guess I have no future, and you can say they don't have context for that. They don't understand. They're little boys. So I always flip it around and I say, today, if you went into Target and there was the future is male plastered over cups on shirts and everything, you'd be like, oh my God, what is my daughter going to think about her own future, So it's kind of like, well, why is that okay with these boys? They don't know the history of humanity and the ups and downs and the twists and turns. So definitely, when you view young men today, I have compassion for what they're saying. It's a problem, 100%. That's one thing that my goal is to cut back on, like things that lead to radicalization and stuff like that. But to blame them or say they're the problem is only going to double down on why they're pushing back on like the feminist movement and stuff like that.
Michael?
I'm completely on board with the notion that we have to be compassionate toward where boys and men are. I made the argument earlier that what we're witnessing is a kind of disconnect between the world that has changed so fundamentally and ideologies of masculinity that in fact no longer conform to the world that we're living in. And in that place, you have a lot of false prophets, a lot of people telling boys and men what they should do and how they should behave. And those false prophets are people like Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate, and you all know who. There's some other ones that I can't remember. My son keeps telling me that about them, and I do think, but I do want to say a couple of things about this because you mentioned that 50% thing that feminism hasn't, has gone too far. Maybe the other 50% think it hasn't gone far enough. I think that changes among men are not necessarily negative. I agree with you. Boys are getting negative messages. I hear that. It would be foolish to say they're not. However, here's what the data show. The more gender equal, I've considered my job over the past 40 years to try to, I'm American, right? So I'm in marketing. I try to sell feminism to men. And here's how I sell it. Here's what the data show. And this is really good news because men are doing more housework and childcare than they ever have. Our family relationships are more gender equal than your grandparents wouldn't recognize the kinds of relationships you have. And I think that this is all to the good. Right now, one small caveat really quickly. We sociologists, we measure housework and family as if it was a unit. It's not. Men have managed to separate them so that men are doing a lot more childcare, but not a lot more housework. So what happens in many families is dad becomes the fun parent. Dad takes the kids to the park to play soccer while mom cleans the breakfast dishes, does the laundry, makes the bed, and makes lunch. The kids come home at 11:30. We had such a great time. Dad is such an involved parent, right? So it is the case, empirically, it is the case that not quite so much. But I want to tell you what the data show on this. The more gender equal our relationships, right? The more gender equal our relationships, the happier and healthier our children are. They do better in school. They have lower rates of absenteeism. They're less likely to see a child therapist. They're less likely to be put on medication. They're less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. So when men and women have equal relationships, their children are happier and healthier and do better in school. Okay, now I'm a salesman. Maybe that's not enough. When we have gender equal relationships, the wives are healthier. Now I'm talking specifically about gender unequal relationships, that is to say gender different relationships, but clearly this works itself out differently in gay or lesbian families, and I could talk about that too. But in a heterosexual family, when people share housework and childcare, the women are happier and healthier. They're less likely to see a therapist, they're less likely to be put on medication, they report higher levels of marital satisfaction, and they're more likely to go to the gym. Women are happier and healthier. All right, maybe that's not enough for men. We're still trying to sell it. When men share housework and childcare, when they have more gender equal relationships, the men are healthier. They go to the doctors more often for routine screenings, but less often to the emergency room. They're less likely to see a therapist, less likely to be put on medication. And so the men are healthier and happier. All right, maybe that's not enough. When men are in more gender equal relationships, they have more sex. Now, of these 4 really interesting findings, which one do you think Men's Health magazine put on its cover? Housework makes her horny was their headline. Not when she does it. But now, men in the room. These data are collected, these are longitudinal data. They're collected over a long period of time. So none of the men in here should be going, I think I'll do the dishes tonight. A long period of time, okay. But my point is, gender equality is the best thing that has ever come down the pike for men. Not just for women, not just for our kids. It is a win-win all across the board. Corporations know this, right? They know that the more gender more gender equality in companies does far better for profitability, for return on investment, for turnover, labor turnover. People are they're much more likely to stay. So gender equality is a complete winner for men. And that's, I think, the case that we have to make. It is not a zero-sum game at all. It is a win-win.
Lisa?
I agree that there's so many benefits, especially to men, in marriage. They live longer, they're healthier, and in a balanced home, it goes very well. But one of the biggest issues today is a lot of young men don't want to get married. They view marriage in a negative light, and I constantly have service, constantly asking young men, would you get married today? No, the family court system is rigged against us. 80% of divorces are initiated by women. All of these statistics, all of this anger, and it stems from them seeing friends, their parents getting divorced. Oh, I don't want to go through that, you know? So, and then you have people like Andrew Tate fueling that. Marriage is horrible, don't get married, women are this and that. So that, I work with Brad Wilcox, who's from IFS, and he talks a lot about the benefits of marriage for men. But that's all good if men want to get married, you know, if they're putting themselves out there. And today we're seeing a rise in men not wanting to get married. So I think that's something we have to address, is their actual concerns, because they're not saying they don't want to get married because they think they're going to be less healthy. They're saying they don't want to get married because why take the risk? As one person said to me, like, why drink the Kool-Aid? Like, so I think that's probably something even more important right now, is to address like why men don't want to get married.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot of the things I was thinking of. Yeah, I want to, one of the problems I keep coming back to is men not feeling recognized. And let me say something else about what Michael said about childcare and doing the dishes, as a matter of fact. In graduate school, I was fortunate. I was very young, didn't know what I was doing, but I was in graduate school and I had a class with B.F. Skinner, who's probably the most famous psychologist who's lived in this country in the last 100 years, if not more. And one of the things I learned from him is that the importance of reinforcement is vitally important. We do what has nice consequences. Childcare, taking care of a baby, is really much more fun than housework. And if you've ever seen, maybe it's changed, a male dorm room or residence hall versus a girl's dorm room and residence hall, unless it's changed dramatically, the place that my brother shared with his roommate, he was already in graduate school, was a pigsty. And I don't want to insult pigs. It was horrible. It was awful. I don't think two women living together would let it get into that state. So for a man, a well-kept house is not the biggest deal in the world. Doing housework. There was a great piece in the New York Times about a guy who did the dishes. And his wife realized, because he was familiar, that's right, it was news. The woman who was familiar with Skinner and she said to her husband, "Thank you, that's fantastic." What would a lot of wives say in that case? Big deal. I do them all the time. When you hear big deal, I do that all the time, your feeling is to hell with you. When you hear someone say, "That was great, thank you," you'll do the dishes again. Because we all really need that. We need reinforcement. Feeling, Michael mentioned feelings. I'm a psychologist. I'm not a sociologist. I think sociologists are wonderful, but I'm a psychologist. And to me, what we do and how we feel are primary. And I'll also echo what Lisa's saying. I think there's a lot of problems now between young men and young women. Everything I read, there is less marriage happening. There's less sex happening, whatever it was about sex. It's not a good situation, and maybe it's because they watch their parents. But I think part of it is, and I'll say one more thing, because everyone's kind of going on. Jordan Peterson, who Michael mentioned somewhat negatively, he gave these great speeches and wrote a book in which he said to men, shape up, make your bed, do something. And Richard Reeves, who's the preeminent spokesman for men's and boys' issues, he's famous, he's all over the place being interviewed. He said he went to hear Jordan Peterson speak. He was blown away that the young men in the room felt heard. They felt understood. There were guys in there who were suicidal, and they heard Jordan Peterson saying to them, "You're okay. You just got to get your life together." And they were blown away by it. Jordan Peterson's gone a little off the tracks recently, but back then, he was a really good kind of person to really help men out. So just want to say that.
I'll dissent on Jordan Peterson. But let me just say a couple of things. Marriage rates here are higher than they are, for example, in all of the countries rated by the World Economic Forum on gender equality, which are usually in order, as you can imagine: Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, or some variation of that, right? They have very low marriage rates. Why? Because they have health care, because they have free education through college. so you don't have to get married to get onto somebody's health care. The only people who get married in Sweden are people who want a religious ceremony. Nothing against that. That's great. Go for it. But you don't have to get married for financial reasons. You don't have to get married for Social Security reasons. So when you remove the economic incentive, what's left in marriage is a religious ceremony, which is fine. But what I'm saying is the marriage rates that we have now, I would be willing to bet, I've not done this study, but I would be willing to bet that Obamacare, that is to say the fact that everyone can get health care now, has actually had a depressing effect on marriage because you don't have to do it anymore. Second thing, I just want to make one comment about housework. This is not genetic. I was the expert witness for the Justice Department in the cases against VMI and Citadel, two all-male military schools that were forced to admit women, much against their will. And let me tell you, those are the neatest barracks you have ever seen in your life. Spotless, because there's a hierarchy and they're policed. But I talked to this one guy, and he said, you know, my wife keeps telling me, I really want you to, you know, you never vacuum. Here you are sitting here watching a football game, and you never vacuum the living room. Vacuum the living room. And he says, okay. So I vacuumed the living room. She comes downstairs, and she says, you call that cleaned? And she takes the vacuum, and she does it again. So he said, well, I'll never do that again. And I said to him, let me ask you a question. Let's just say I'm your supervisor, and I say, I need this report by Friday. And you give me this report, and I say, this report sucks. This is terrible. Would you then say, well, I'll never write another report? No. You would say, how can I learn to do it better? It's a really simple thing. Last quick comment on one other point. If you want to increase, there is no evidence, none, zero evidence that sex of teacher independently has any effect on boys or girls' development. None. But if you want to increase the number of male teachers, I'm down with that. Just increase their salaries. Men go where the money is. Period. Full stop. You want to do it? Double their salaries. You'll have tons of men. Right? It's not a gender thing. It's an economic thing.
Thank you. Now we're going to open the floor to questions. Anyone have a question? We'll pass the mic.
What mic?
Oh, this mic. Or someone has to come up. Yes?
It won't be recorded, so just repeat whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
Repeat.
I've heard a few times about the biological differences between men and women, and I'm not a biologist, so I'm not very familiar with it. I just wanted to hear more detail what that is and if there are any studies that try to get more.
Okay, Shadia, what you're going to say?
What are the biological differences between men and women?
Listen, I wrote this textbook, which I'm afraid one or two of you may have actually had to read. I apologize. But it's called The Gendered Society, and it basically, the first chapter reviews all of the biological literature about the biological differences between women and men. And the first thing everybody in this room thought of immediately is testosterone, right? Because testosterone, as we know, causes aggression, right? So here's the classic experiment about testosterone. And if you don't know, if once you hear this, you'll realize how the biological argument is so frequently made to end the discussion rather than to begin it, right? So here's Robert Sapolsky, a primatologist at Stanford. He is amazing. He did this research with chimps. And what he did was he arrayed them, male chimps, in a hierarchy, because chimps will immediately sort themselves into a hierarchy. A beats up B, B beats up C beats up D, etc. And then what he does is he takes the middle monkey 3, and he gives him an injection of testosterone off the scale, way above monkey A and B. Puts him back in the cage. What do you think happens? Well, everybody's typical answer, of course, is he becomes number 1, right? Not at all. He stays away from numbers 1 and 2, but he beats the shit out of 4 and 5. Just relentless, pummeling them. So what does Sapolsky conclude? Testosterone doesn't cause aggression. It facilitates it, but it has to be seen as legitimate. The target has to already be seen as legitimate for it to have any effect at all. So don't think that men's predominance of testosterone is the driver of this. The target of men's violence must still be seen as legitimate. It's why so few employees attack their employers. They may have much higher testosterone, but the target must be seen as legitimate. And it's why so many men hit their wives.
Lisa, Mark?
There's actually a lot of interesting data points about the biological differences. I'm not quite sure, maybe a few decades ago, Mark, you might know more about this, that they wanted to tone down the idea that there was biological differences between men and women. For a long time, you couldn't say that women's brains were smaller. Do you remember that all the science was being pushed away because they didn't want it to seem like one sex was better than the other during the movement trying to get more women ahead. But when you really dive into the differences between men and women, it's fascinating. Even with testosterone itself, there's just a study that Brad had that when a man has a child, his testosterone lowers a little bit, like biologically. So he becomes naturally a bit less aggressive when he becomes a father. So then you have to kind of wonder, because nature's a funny thing, you know? So you're like, was having a family something that would kind of soften the communities?
Fatigue also lowers your testosterone.
Yeah, right.
Those of you who've never had it.
But it actually shows that, like, having a child very similar to how women's bodies changes when they have a child, or women's brains are connected to their children, and they can wake up and even when a woman's breastfeeding and with her baby, any nutrients the baby needs, her body naturally creates specifically what her child needs because it picks up on it through when they're drinking baby's milk. Like, these are all sex differences, you know, and it stems from your brain and stuff. So I know Andrew Huberman just did a podcast with one of the big scientists on male and female differences in the brain. So I highly recommend checking out his podcast. It was from about maybe 4 weeks ago. So
I just want to say something on this. I mean, I thought sex doesn't, I think immediately of size, height, upper body strength. And what's very important about sex differences, they're not automatic. It's not like all women are this and all men are that. Absolutely not. There's overlap, and so that's very important. And I want to talk for a moment about sexuality. I taught classes in the 70s and 80s about gender, and young women in the classes, when I talked about male sexuality, they talked to me, because I admitted that I was a sexual young man, and they said to me, well, it's because of all the pornography and everything. I said, are you kidding? When I was 11 or 12 years old, there was no pornography. I'm from another era.
Oh, yes, there was.
Well, very little. There was, but I didn't know where it was, Michael. You had sources that I obviously didn't have. But I said to them, all I knew is that I was obsessed. I'm not going to get into what happens to a man sexually. I think you all know the stuff that happens. And I'm telling them, this isn't from culture. And here's something else. I'm a believer in evolutionary psychology. The reality is, if men in particular, female orgasm is wonderful, but it's not necessary for there to be procreation. I'm really sorry about that, but it's not. The fact is that if we weren't oversexed as primitive beings, we would not be here. It had to feel not just good, but great. And it especially had to feel great for the men. And then men learned, it should be really nice for women too. I'm not putting that down. That's fantastic. But that's really important. One more thing, and I got in trouble for this. I'm an old guy. My wife is not a kid. Older women are very attractive. But the reality is, men tend to be attracted to younger women. Think about this. Suppose, back in the primitive times, men were turned off by young women. The only women who turned them on were postmenopausal women. We also wouldn't be here. I'm not saying this is good. It's not good. Life isn't necessarily good. How we are as human beings isn't necessarily good. But I think there are some sex differences. And again, there are women who are highly sexual. There are men who don't care. But I think overall there is a difference.
Thank you.
There's only one organ in the human body that is designed exclusively for pleasure. Do you know what that is?
The brain?
The clitoris.
I'll take Frank at the back. Frank, can you project?
That must
We're gonna have to-
some evolutionary foundation that like women should be able to enjoy this. Period. That's evolution.
Frank, go ahead. Yeah, I know.
I'm glad the Gillette commercial was brought up. To me, that was a deliberate campaign to demonize young boys and young men. Michael, how would you respond to that campaign saying, the whole boys will be boys thing? That's bad.
The question. You want me to? The question was about that Gillette ad where the boys are rolling around and fighting and stuff, and the father intervenes. And I will say, tell you a short anecdote. But that I was asked after that commercial ran to consult with Gillette about like what they should be doing, because that clearly wasn't it. And everyone. I mean, my feeling about that is exactly. It was exactly wrong. It was exactly wrong for what it showed and then what it was trying to say. It was, in fact, reinforcing some of the things that Mark is saying about boys being the problem, or being told they're toxic. Nothing makes me crazier than this phrase, toxic masculinity. The people who did that right, by the way, were not. And look, I mean, to give you a good example of something that Mark, evolutionary psychology, is take a look at the changes in Axe from 15 years ago when Axe was being promoted to young boys, and basically you would get like Victoria's Secret models with wings flying down to very hot women to have sex with you. And Axe appealed really, really strongly to 13 and 14-year-old boys who then aged out of it by the time they were 16. So Axe faced this real dilemma, like, what are we going to do? We can't hold them. This is the brand loyalty is the thing to products, right? So how can we hold on to them? So they changed their whole marketing campaign to stop with the pandering to 13-year-old adolescent boy fantasies. One thing so my feeling about that is it was exactly right, and the ad was exactly wrong. So I'll stop there.
Hi, yeah. So I know this is framed as like about the sexist kind of thing, but I'm thinking about how Gen Z, the sort of assumption is that Gen Z women are like not experiencing any of these things or like not as much. But I'm wondering if we could attack it in a more like a materialist way where we're looking at like, okay, they're facing loneliness, they're facing lack of purpose, they're facing unemployment, they're having less sex. Like these are still statistics that are relevant for them. So I'm like, why don't we actually just approach it by trying to fix those things? It's like the onslaught of the technological age has created a lot of this stuff. So I think maybe if we focused on fixing that, I feel like we're siloing it into like, wow, men are having a problem,
Any comments there?
Repeat it. Mark said he couldn't hear it very well.
Okay, so she was asking, like, a lot of these crises that we're talking about with young men today, Gen Z men, Gen Z women are also experiencing the same, the loneliness crisis, all of those things, the increase in suicide, which Jonathan Haidt does great work on young women and how social media has affected them. You're 100% right. We should, in my opinion, address all the issues of gender-specific issues to all of the issues. One problem is a lot of the areas that are the most significant. We haven't touched on too many of them today. When it comes to suicide, men's health, all of those things, there's a lack of awareness about the extremes that it's happening to young men and boys. And there's a lack of resources and support for them. So if we talk about men's health, for example, in the United States, the federal government, we have 8 offices of health specifically for women in our federal government. We have 0 offices for men. To me, and so men are unhealthier, they die earlier. They're twice as likely to die by overdose. They're 4 times as likely to die by suicide. Young men even more than that. So to me, we should, if we're striving for equality here, okay, like that's what we want, right? Shouldn't we have at least one office for men's health, and you could say, well, that's a lot of people are like, that's the CDC, and it's like, no, we need something specific for men, for their issues specifically. So a lot of the topics that are, this is a very complex issue, and there's a lot of topics, but there isn't the same level of support and resources today when it comes to men. And so it's just getting started of people being open to discussing the issues. And I remember 7 years ago when I started, it was bad. If I said something, people would, the hate that came. People like Richard Reeves, I credit Richard Reeves so much with what he's done. He's brought this topic out of the shadows, and he gave all of us credibility who talk about it today. Like, he is my hero. And hopefully it just keeps going. He's even had Melinda Gates come on board with him and work with his organization. So, right when Melinda Gates gets involved, like, it's a very progressive issue. So I think I agree with you 100%. Women's issues need to be addressed, and these same issues. Women are lonely. Women aren't getting married today. Women are struggling finding a partner. Everything should be addressed, but right now it's crucial. It's like dangerous not to address what's happening with young men today. It affects us all.
I think that your question is a really good one. This is a generational issue. I'm a baby boomer. We have not paid enough attention to how this crosses genders, all genders. How this is a crisis not only for white people. This affects all, and we have not addressed it generationally. Our remit today was to talk about boys and men, but I tried in my comments to say this is not an us-them thing. This is not a zero-sum game. And we just, and I think sometimes we feel that it is. In academia, for example, it's very often that if you say, well, here's a sociology of gender course, can we talk about men? You're taking time away from the women. And that, I think, and there I agree, that's problematic. Because you're inviting us to see this as a material issue, an economic one, a structural one, that affects a generation. It also affects that generation differently depending on where you're situated. So I completely agree with you. That's really important. And so just because we're paying attention to one here and focus on that doesn't take away our need to pay attention to the other.
Thank you. Yes?
The gentleman all the way on the left.
Yes.
On my right. You had mentioned the Gillette commercial, to go back to it,
Yes.
and also the reprimanding of boys who write perhaps violent texts or
Yes.
what have you. And I'm just curious what the appropriate reaction would be, in your opinion, to something like that, to an inappropriate display of violence and aggression.
Well, if it's inappropriate, if somebody's being a bully, I say there's no excuse for that. But if it's a couple of boys, fighting as young boys do, I don't think it's so bad. If they're hurting each other, you separate them. But otherwise, I would just say, let it go. It's really okay. It's not the worst thing in the world. And what was the other part of that question?
Well, you also mentioned
The writing part.
The writing part. Oh, yeah. There I feel, how can I put this? School shootings are horrible. They're horrible. But thank God they are exceptionally rare. They don't happen very often. They're usually, incidentally, very often boys who clearly are suicidal. A lot of mass shootings, the shooter kills himself or themselves in the case of Columbine, or they're shot by the police, which is likely to happen, and they probably know that. So that's very difficult. But to write about a story involving violence or something like that, if it's something like, I'd like to blow up my school, I say, okay, that deserves some attention. But if it's just a story about soldiers or something like that, I don't think that's so bad. I did that kind of thing. Other boys did it, and it wasn't so bad. There's other things which can show you there's real problems brewing. But maybe even it's not writing, just the reading that's done. A lot of young men, boys, are put off by some of the reading, which they don't find very interesting. They're all about emotions. A lot of boys I read all the time. I brought my own books into school. I kept them under my desk, because we were reading Paul and Betty or something, and I was reading. But what I was reading was stories about horses.
A wimp.
Thank you. Well, yes, I was reading about
Your fingernails.
the red stallion, the black stallion, sports stuff like that. Incidentally, I want to say one other thing. It's sort of relevant. I understand what Michael is saying about boys. I would have a very different approach. I would say you could have slogans like, it's cool to do well in school. I would have boys, you know, certain people say boys shouldn't be competitive. I did really well in high school. Part of it, why? Because I had my best friend, still my best friend, 70 years later. We were competitive. He did really well, and man, I was going to do better than him. I don't think I won in that, but it kept me going. So I think to try to say to boys, don't be competitive, there are certain fairly natural things about boys, and it can really be used to their advantage, is what I'm saying. So I hope I gave some sort of an answer. Thank you so much.
Okay, David in the back.
Hey, how are you? It's so nice to see so many SUNY intellectuals here. I am one myself. A SUNY intellectual.
Oh.
I am one myself.
I'm Emeritus.
So my question is for you, Michael. You seem to, there's some mutability to the identity or to masculinity. I'm curious of how would you prescribe a new masculinity for men moving forward? What would that exactly entail outside of like doing the dishes so they can get more pussy?
Can you repeat the question too, in those exact words?
In those exact words. So the question is how would we redefine masculinity? And I think the question for me has been in academia. Sorry to go a little SUNY on you, but in academia we don't talk about masculinity anymore. We talk about masculinities. We talk about a plural because we don't posit that there are any particular versions that are hegemonic and that are the one way that everyone should be. Masculinity varies by, you want to?
Yeah, let's just do white men then.
Well, so my very first book about this topic was called Manhood in America, and it's basically a history of the idea of manhood. And at the end, I talk about what I called a democratic manhood, a manhood based on embracing difference. We often think difference is the foundation for inequality in our culture. We think of equality, we think sameness, which is like what communism would bring. It would be terrible. Everyone would be the same. We'd all talk the same, look the same. We like difference, but difference is the foundation for inequality. I argue that what we need is a masculinity that embraces difference within the framework of equality, so that all masculinities can be seen and valued as equal. That's to me to me that's the promise of seeing of gender equality being seen as not a zero-sum game. So it's not. So and the other thing, I'm gonna take this for 1 minute. I'm just gonna tell you one more story because that's how I think. So I did a talk at West Point not long ago, and I asked the men at the cadets. Now this is a co-ed group. It was about 900 cadets in the room, and I asked them, "What does it mean to be a good man?" Now this is West Point. You can imagine what they said: honor, duty, responsibility, do the right thing, stand up for the little guy. You know, all those things that you. And I said, "Well, where'd you learn that?" And they looked at me like, what are you talking about? It's the Judeo-Christian heritage. It's everything in our culture. And I said, okay, fine. So that's what it means to be a good man. Responsible, honor, duty, sacrifice. Now let me ask you another question. Tell me if those ideas come up for you if I say, man the fuck up, be a real man. And they say, oh no, that's completely different. Well, what does that mean? Strong, powerful, competitive, take no prisoners, get rich, get laid, everything. That was what they said. And I said, where'd you learn that? And they said, in order, my father, my coach, my guy friends, my older brother. So this is the homosocial part, right? Men learn what it means to be a real man through homosocial interactions with other guys. They police each other. They tell them what it means. And what I want you to know, SUNY to SUNY, is what I would like to tell my son. I would love to tell my son how awesome I am, but what I really need to tell him are those moments that you have had, that I have had, when I have betrayed my own idea of what it means to be a good man to prove to other guys that I was a real man. when the bullies came and bullied the guy next to me in the locker room, and I suddenly found my shoes to be so fascinating that I could not take my eyes off them, that I didn't do the right thing. I didn't stand up for the little guy. And that happened in middle school, and I'm still ashamed of myself. I tracked him down. I did. About 5 years ago, I tracked him down, and this is Park Slope. I live in Park Slope. He lives around the corner, and he didn't remember it at all. He didn't remember. He'd blocked the whole thing. But what I'm saying to you is that difference. We all know, there's a universal here, what it means to be a good man, and I know everyone's sitting there thinking, that's what it means to be a good person. Yes, but men experience that as gendered nonetheless. We all know what it means. What holds us back from being the good men we say we want to be? It's in fact the policing to be a real man.
Lisa?
Could I just say something about this? Thank you. This is a very good question. I'm also SUNY. I taught at SUNY New Paltz for 25 years. So
We're gonna have a party after.
yeah, I get it. I think what Michael's saying is great, and I think, to be honest, listening to him, I think he is, I'm sorry to say this, a better man than I am, because I don't have that kind of beautiful history. And I'm serious, but I think I've done my best. But here's something I am going to say. When I was a young guy, I was very nice. I wasn't very tall, unfortunately. I was smart. I was funny. I was a whole bunch of good things. One thing I wasn't was what could be called cool. I wasn't cool. I treated girls, they were girls back then, very nicely. And who did the girls want? They wanted the guys who were jerks. Yep. They really did. They wanted the guys who didn't treat them well. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is not working out. Now my father, again, I made all this bad picture, but he wasn't all that bad. He said, Mark, hang in there. One day, they'll be knocking at your door. I thought, yeah, Dad, sure. Well, as it turns out, I got a little older, and suddenly the fact that I was smart, the fact that I was funny, and I picked up a guitar, and let me tell you, picking up a guitar is no small thing, you know, that I did that, and all of a sudden, I wouldn't say they were knocking at my door. They were there. They were around. They were interested. But as a young guy, I didn't get any of that. When you're a young guy, that really hurts. And you're saying, what's wrong? So I'm just thinking that is important. But you can outgrow it. Okay.
I want another quick anecdote on this, because this is so great. Those of you who know Anna Quindlen as a novelist, she used to be a columnist at the New York Times. And once she wrote this column that I used to assign to my classes, she says, okay, ladies, she says, all right, let's be honest. I'm going to tell you about two men, and you tell me how you feel. One of them is slight, thin. He has receding strawberry blonde hair. He is completely faithful. He will never betray you. He will never stray from you. He loves you completely and utterly. The other, and it's tall, dark, roguishly handsome with a mustache. He will certainly betray you. He's never been faithful in his life. Which one do you want? And all the women were saying, well, you know, can I date number two before I marry number one? But she then says, okay, let's give them names. Let's call the first one Ashley Wilkes and the second Rhett Butler. Now who would you choose? And of course, every woman over 50 in the United States knows the most sexy scene in 1939 was the scene where Rhett Butler carries Scarlett O'Hara up the stairs to date rape her, and because she's pounding on him to stop, right? And so one woman says to Anna Quindlen, and this is the key. Well, you see, the thing about Rhett Butler, he's never been loved by me. When I love him, he'll change. Women see their loving a man as transformative. You want the bad guy who you can transform into the good guy. You don't want someone who's ready-made. You want a project.
Lisa, as the female in the,
As
the
the
group.
female here, I'm listening away. Oh. So I have a little bit of an interesting take, because I believe, like I said in the beginning, that the breakdown of a harmonious relationship between men and women is the root cause of many of our problems today. And humans have gotten to the point, progressed to the point that we're at today by a harmonious collaboration between men and women. Both men and women have had privileges for being a man or a woman, and we both had duties. Many of those were imposed on us by nature, but we worked together to continue the human race. Because we've done that, we've progressed to the point we're at today, where we're making AI, and we have like AI gods on our phone, and we've really moved the ball to a point where we're very lucky to even believe that we can change what masculine and feminine it means. Research has proven that when a natural disaster happens or a war breaks out, people revert back to their gender roles very quickly. And we don't have to just think this could happen. It actually happened in Ukraine. They were a country that was being pushed a lot of gender equality there. And the moment that the war broke out that day, they banned all men 18 to 60 from leaving the country, every single man. So including transgender women, they were also banned. So we saw within 12 hours that gender equality goes out the door when something like a war takes place. So even the fact that we're having this conversation today of the new man, the new feminine, the new everything, it's actually a sign of how luxurious our lives are today, and almost to the point where we can play around with these ideas. But throughout history, that's happened before, and then a war breaks out, or natural disasters that we can't control. So I think we should always remember we need to evolve the way men and women are today, just because we've evolved so much as a society. But we always have to remember the core of who we are, and it's more about oneness and duty and working together. And remember that even in the comfy times, we should still have respect for men, because in the rough times, they are the ones that we're going to expect to step up and take that role.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to end with closing remarks, 3 minutes each. Michael, since you started, I'm going to have you, Mark started, but you're going to be last now. And now, Michael, you're going to be first.
All right.
I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock.
3 minutes of silence. No, I got nothing to say.
Yeah.
I think that we circle around several different questions, and you just brought that up. And I think that the questions that we all want something that looks like mutuality, mutual respect, respect for difference, whether those differences are characterological between groups or individual differences. And I would say that one of the things to my mind, one of my least favorite sociologists you've cited a few times, Brad Wilcox, basically has this idea that yes, indeed, the way to keep marriages together is for women to stop with this ambition. Just go back to the home, have babies, and be moms. That's what women are supposed to do. It's women's, and to my mind, there is nothing gendered about the word ambition, nothing gendered about the word competence, nothing gendered about the word competitive. Those are human qualities, and you find them in every culture. And the more that we know about, for example, from anthropology, about how hunting and gathering societies worked, not true that last story, gotta tell it. All right, so my son he's now 26. When he was 6, we went to the Museum of Natural History. And he said, and we were going through, you know how you go through like the Hall of Man, and then the Hall of the Mammals? You know the Hall of the Mammals? And in the Hall of Man, you have all these indigenous cultures in which the father is out with the spear in front, and mom is sitting by the fire with the babies, right? This is all Hall of Man, right? Then you go to Hall of Mammals. and the fierce male lion is in the front, and the lioness is in the back with the lion cubs. And my son says, now he's 5, he says, "Look, Daddy, they have families just like us." And it caught me by surprise. And I said, actually, they don't. Actually, it's the female lions who hunt and the males who preen. It's not this way at all. This idea that these things are natural and that they are evolutionarily preordained is a fiction. And it is a fiction that the Museum of Natural History has been putting on us for a century. It's not true. There's massive variations, especially in our closest relatives, like gorillas, for example, and macaques. All of those, they have very different kinds of social hierarchies. So my argument is what we are looking for is a way to create a society in which we have mutual respect for difference, and we have less and less of that, to my mind, these days than we ever have. And honor the fact that in the 1960s, a large number of white middle-class women said that they were fed up with this idea about what women are supposed to be like and how they're supposed to do it. And I think many of us, including myself, are the children of those women. My mother tried desperately to be a good housewife. She really wanted to be. She was one of these New York City kids in the 30s and 40s who was really smart, so she kept skipping grades because they didn't know what to do with them. She graduated from high school at 15, college at 18, and then she got married. And she wanted to be a good housewife and a good mom, but she was really ambitious and she was really smart. So she became a school teacher. What else? But that was nice while I was a small child. And then she said, "You know what? I'm going to go back to school and become a school psychologist." So she became a school psychologist. This is why I'm not a psychologist, by the way. So then she became a school psychologist. And then she was working with kids who had learning disabilities, and she noticed that she could really work with them really well, so she became a specialist with learning disabilities. And then she noticed that sometimes she would work with the kids who had learning disabilities, and she'd give them some remedial strategies, and then they would come back the next week, and it was all undone. So she said, maybe I should do family therapy, in which the kid is the identified patient, but I want to talk the whole family dynamic, which is undoing the work that the kid is doing. So she became a family therapist. And then after that, she said, talking to the grown-ups is kind of interesting. So she went back to school for 6 more years, became a psychoanalyst, and dealt with individuals. My mother is a good example to me of that idea of finally taking the lid off ambition and promise that an entire generation of baby boomer women basically said, "We've had enough of this. We're done. We want something else. The outside world looks pretty interesting. Let's go." We're not going to give up being moms. We're not going to give up being wives if we want to be, but we are going to give up being the only part of our lives.
Thank you, Michael. And Lisa?
Goes into family business.
So I do want to bring it back around to the struggles of boys and men and how important it is to address those issues today. I wrote an article about what I believe now that people are actually taking notice and doing things, that men's health and men's mental health is the #1 thing that we need to tackle. We are often telling men to open up and to shut up at the same time. We're telling them to express their emotions, and then professors are coming up with new terms like man-keeping, which is essentially teaching men to not express their emotions. They're getting these mixed messages, and then we're asking them to change for a mental health system that doesn't value their needs. So I believe that our #1 thing that we should all advocate for is men's mental health, and to change the mental health system to help our men, rather than telling men to change for our mental health system that isn't just working for them. There's a lot of ways that we can do that. We can focus on male-led and male-focused solutions to address mental health. We can try to encourage more male therapists. 80% of psychology students today are female. In the past, when like law firms and therapists were mostly men, we would say, well, what about clients that are female who want to see a woman, who wants to work with a woman? This is bad for them. But now 80% are women. We need men for men. So maybe we can do things like STEM programs, but for men to get into teaching positions, therapy positions, encourage them in these areas where their representation is truly needed. Like of course, we would love to see more female scientists and everything like that, but this is like life or death here. The gender gap in suicide is expanding. You'd think over the years of us changing these norms, we would see the suicide rate dropping, but it's not. It's actually increasing. So I think the number one thing that we can address right away is mental health. And I'd also encourage everyone to look into what different governors around the country are doing right now. For a long time, I was going to DC and it was only Republican leaders who would meet, and they still didn't do anything. They still didn't address the issues, but at least they would take a meeting. Now that has completely changed, and we're seeing Democratic governors around the country today actually doing things for boys and men. Gavin Newsom just signed an executive order in California to address the boys and young men's crisis and already got to work doing things. He started last week, announced a mentorship program calling on 10,000 young men to come join and be like big brothers, basically, to boys. And he's moving forward with that with the help of Richard Reeves. But then also Gretchen Whitmer in Detroit, and Governor Moore in Maryland, they're doing the same thing. They're starting men's commissions there to tackle these issues. So this isn't really a taboo topic anymore. It's not something that's hidden in the shadows. This is something that we all kind of need to grow and understand, because it truly affects us all, men, women, children, older individuals. So I hope you walk away today with a different perspective and maybe a little bit more hope that we can all work together for everybody's well-being.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, Mark. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thanks to both of my fellow panelists, and thanks to all of you for being here. I concur with what Lisa was saying, and my main point is I think that the issues of boys and men have not been getting, especially young men, have not been getting the attention that they deserved. I first noticed that boys and young men were struggling in the early 1990s, and I started talking about it with people, and nobody seemed to know. They didn't seem to care, and it really bothered me because it really obviously was a problem. There was an article published in 2006, Business Week. It was a cover story, and it was about the new gender gap and about what was happening with boys. And it went nowhere. There was a whole bunch of things in 2006. Then, about a year ago, in my alumni magazine, Harvard Magazine, they had a thing that said, the new gender gap. Boys and men are having problems. I went, the new gender gap? Where have you been? So I sent an article in, and they published it because I'm an alum, so they'll publish it, saying, this is not anything new. This has been around for a long time. It's that issue that really gets to me. Why did it take so long? And I think it took so long because I agree, women, adult women, women of the past, including the recent past, really didn't have the opportunities young women have today. There was something back in my day called women's consciousness raising groups. I spoke to one of my daughters-in-law about that. She didn't even know what I was talking about. I mean, she's a professional. It was not an issue for her. So that, to me, is really the single biggest problem. I also think, to put down masculinity bothers me. And finally, I'll say something. Lisa mentioned man-keeping. Man-keeping, something that a couple of psychologists, I think, talked about and said is the idea of women having to spend so much emotional time with men, emotional labor, because they don't have enough friends. And I'm thinking, that's very sad. But I'll tell you something. I did research years ago in which I asked men and women, if you were having a problem, who would you rather talk about it with? Many people said, I don't care, man or a woman. It's okay, either way. But those who had a preference definitely wanted they preferred to talk to a woman about the problem. So I think you can be successful, you can be ambitious, you can also be a warm, loving person. And finally, my little story, a couple of weddings I've gone to, the celebrant talked to the bride and groom, and all he said to them was, make sure that not only do you fulfill yourself, that your spouse will also find their complete fulfillment in their work and their life. And I remember concluding, I wrote one of my many humor columns about this, and it was a blog post in Psychology Today, in which I said, you know, if somehow, in spite of this, you actually fall in love, so much the better, okay? And that's what got to me. It was all about the person fulfilling themselves, but what about helping each other, being there for the other person? To me, I'm a big, big fan of marriage. I think it's very sad so many people aren't getting married. And my wife worked her whole adult life, but was a person that I could turn to for anything. And her friends turned to her. So I think that's a very valuable thing, never to be taken lightly. So thanks.
Thank you. All right. So what we're going to do now, we have this little baggie, and we're going to have another vote. And we can raise our hands, too. Yeah, do that. Let's do that. Okay. Okay. Who votes yes, men have it bad? Wow. Or at a disadvantage. At a disadvantage. Men are at a disadvantage. Okay. And who votes no, men still are at the advantage? All right. That is the winner. Men still have the advantage. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now we get to have fun and drink. There are drinks out back as well as water and maybe some leftover pasta. Thank you.